I have with me today Deonn Stott, who's going to talk about her quilting essentials, and she's going to show us her favorite tips, tricks, and tools. So welcome, Deonn.
Oh, thanks, Cindy. I always love coming to your studio.
Well, you have great tips and tricks, and so you're here to show us some of the tools that you need to get started quilting. So I just want you to pretend I've never quilted before, and we'll talk about all that's needed for quilting.
Well, everything I need to start quilting is in my little sewing kit here. And you might recognize this bag from Gina's laminate bag tutorial.
Yeah, that's a great bag.
It's a perfect size for a sewing kit. And you can see it's kind of bulging at the seams, but why don't you crack it open and we'll see what's in there.
You've got all the stuff you need to quilt in here.
Right.
Is that right? Okay, well, let's take a look. So, okay, right off the bat, I see you've got your rotary cutter and a lot of different scissors. You always see lots of different scissors.
Well, for different purposes, dressmaker shears for cutting. I use pinking shears a lot when I'm doing applique or curves. Small scissors. There's some other little tiny nippers in there for snipping.
You've got
a little to clip threads with.
And you've also got these.
And I use these little nippers to get really close to the quilt when I'm snipping threads.
Sure.
But this rotary cutter has made such a difference in the quilting world, I think. Grandma had to use scissors and cut out all of her pieces by hand. But with this blade, and it is kind of a dangerous thing, it is a knife, a circular knife in there. We need to be really careful when we're using it. So safety is an issue. But you can get such perfect cuts with the rotary blade if you use the right tools. The mat that's self-healing, and a nice straight line ruler that you can see that it has the markings through it, so you can measure and cut at the same time. So should we demonstrate that?
Yes, let's do it.
Let's use this fat quarter. You always want to press your fabrics before you cut, just to get the wrinkles out.
Iron.
Yeah, this Oliso is wonderful.
Yeah, you don't have to prop it up, and it raises itself, doesn't it? But any hot iron,
there it goes,
is helpful.
Right. Okay, and so you can align your fabric on the mat and then trim it so that it's square using a long ruler that you can see through, and this one has grid marks on it. And then you place your ruler on the fabric, aligning it with the marks on the mat itself. And then hold your blade, I'm going to unlock that. Hold your blade vertical and start just before the fabric, and then try and keep it straight. Anchor your ruler so it doesn't slide, and then you get a really beautiful straight cut. You want to do that?
Yes, and I always like to lean a little bit over the fabric, so I put a little more pressure.
Just so the ruler won't slide.
Yeah.
And always cut away from yourself. You never want to cut left-handed or towards your fingers, and just be sure to keep that blade straight up and down, so secure against the ruler so that it doesn't slide off and slice a finger, and then lock it when you're finished. And just get in that habit. I know a lady who charged $5 in her classes every time she saw somebody leave their blade open.
That would be a good habit to get into, or it would cost you money. All right, well, that's great tips. So let's see what else you've got in here. Oh, these are essential for you.
They are for me, that's for sure. And one in every room.
Bin cushion.
Bin cushion.
Of course. You've got your Quilter's Bible, and this is made by you, and there's a lot of great tips.
I just have all my
everything
that I need at my fingertips. If I need to calculate how much backing or binding, if I need to learn anything about fabric or rulers, things like that.
Quilter's Bible. That's
math
great.
Formulas.
Now this is cute and easy to make, it looks like, and you've got your pins in there, your needles, and
extra sewing machine needles.
Yeah.
Little pair of scissors.
Another little pair of scissors, so that's a great idea.
Needle nook.
Glue stick, and this is any old glue stick, but it's
Yeah,
The-
I actually use this in place of pins sometimes, and I find that essential in my sewing kit.
And that just washes out.
Mhm.
And I can't even believe you fit this in. You've got your little mini iron.
Right.
You've got pen to write on your quilt. You could use what is it called? Selvage gauge instead.
Oh, yeah.
Do you use this in place of your selvage gauge?
I do, and then I can measure my 1/4 inch seam allowance, or use it for cutting small items with the rotary blade. Mm-hmm.
Got your seam ripper there.
Right.
You got chalk to
Marking
your
my
fabric.
quilt. Mm-hmm.
Oh, and that's really cute. And you're going to show us how to make that, right?
Yeah, a little tape measure with some cute Riley Blake ribbon on the back of it.
Okay, and then the last couple things, you've got
A square up ruler. Mm-hmm.
got some thread, another pencil for marking
Marking
your
pencil. Mm-hmm.
quilt, and then just a little teeny
A little mat. So
self-healing
the
mat.
mat, the rotary blade, a ruler, those are kind of the basics. Scissors, pins, needles, thread, and I always like to use a nice thin thread so that it doesn't make my seam bulky.
Do you use 100% cotton thread in your quilt?
You know, this thread is my favorite, and it's so fine, but it's polyester thread, but it feels like cotton.
Okay.
And so I use it for quilting and for long arm quilting.
I know there's a debate whether to use all cotton
You
or
know,
all
and it's
some
your own personal
polyester.
preference, and you can find, you know, what works in your machine, what works for you, what you prefer. And so,
Well, great. Those are some great things tips to get us started. What are we going to work on today?
well, I have a surprise for you, Cindy. I made you a little laminate bag that's going to be your
And I
sewing
love
on the
orange
go.
chevron.
Isn't that cute? And we'll make a few of these little projects.
You're
so
going to
you
make
can
me
have
organized yet, aren't you?
Well, maybe. But at least it'll be handy.
Yes. No,
And
I love
ready
it.
to go.
Thank you very much.
So you've got your rotary blade here. Why don't we keep that over there?
Okay.
And
And you've made me this before.
little pin cushion.
Yes.
You can never have too many of those. And this little
So let's talk about
tape
this.
measure.
You
Should
always
we?
have to have a tape measure, and mine never looks this neat.
I know, and that might prevent, you know, it from disappearing from your sewing room
Mm-hmm.
if it has your brand on it. So here's some cute Riley Blake ribbon, and it's just stitched right onto a regular old tape
So
measure.
it's just a grosgrain ribbon,
Mm-hmm.
and you just stitch on both sides. What
Right,
a
and then I
clever
just
idea.
stitched a little tie at the end.
That is a great idea.
And then wrap
this
it up
would
and-
make a perfect gift for a
It would.
quilter
Yeah.
or a sewer in your life. Just simple and easy, and I love that. Thank you. And you color coordinated it, orange
yeah.
and orange.
Well, you know, you guys have such cute ribbons and things.
Okay, and I noticed, okay, this is my fabric for the project we're going to work on.
Right, actually it's a few different projects. One of the very basic things to start with when you're sewing is to establish your 1/4 inch seam allowance. A 1/4 of an inch seam allowance is usually what all patterns for quilts are made.
Based
with.
on, and all the
Mhm.
measurements and
And
requirements are for that.
everyone has their own personal 1/4 inch seam allowance, or, you know, where they're comfortable sewing their seams. But we want to make sure, let's do a little test.
Okay.
And we want to make sure that our seam allowance is going to be as close to perfect as we can get it. But and that's so that our pieces can all fit together when we're making a quilt. And
Okay.
your quilt will lie flat.
So
So we've got
again,
3 1.5 inch strips, and I want you to sew them so
right
that.
sides together.
Mhm.
And
So
I
those
have a
two-
foot that tells me exactly the 1/4 an inch, but it's always good to test your foot to make
Right.
sure it's completely
And we can do
accurate.
that in a minute. There is a foot on the 1/4 inch guide foot on this sewing machine.
Okay, we've sewn this.
Okay, so your iron is probably just as important as your sewing machine. And pressing your seams as you go will help your blocks lie flat. And usually I like to press the seam flat to sink the stitches.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of softens the fabric. Press it flat and then open it up, and we press the seam allowance to one side. Okay?
Get a nice crisp edge.
Oh, and I don't even have to put that iron up. That's great. Okay, and now we'll measure and see if that's exactly 1 inch.
Okay.
And if it is, then we don't need to adjust our sewing machine at all.
So we'll get our smaller ruler,
Right?
and that is
Is it wider or skinnier, or is it just exactly?
Exactly
Okay.
1 inch.
Nice. Perfect.
So our machine's good.
Our machine is good. We've used the guide on the foot. But if we didn't have a guide on our sewing machine foot, there is a way that we can test, or that we can set up our sewing machine so it can sew.
So if this was off,
If it's skinnier, then you need to take, if it's smaller than 1 inch, then you need to take a smaller seam allowance. If it's wider,
and then you
need to take a
when you do
wider.
that.
Well, yes, if it's skinnier. But if it's wider, then your seam
Then you
allowance
can
is
just-
not quite big enough and you need to make another one. Try going in 1 thread difference
Yes.
until you get it right. And then you can set up your sewing machine with a ruler and use a strip of tape as your guide, so you always know where your 4/3
So
seam
instead
allowance
of, let me just show this.
Mhm.
So instead of using, this has a guide, and I think this is the easiest way to,
It's worth the investment if you can.
because you use this as you're sewing along, and that's your gauge for your 1/4 inch.
Right.
But if you don't have that, you're talking about setting up your tape, so you're sewing right
Yeah,
on.
and you can just use a ruler and slide it under your needle, put your needle down on the 1/4 inch line, and then put tape to the side of it, and just keep
Instead
that
of
on your
using
sewing
your
machine.
foot.
Mhm.
Okay, that's a great tip.
Okay, so now that we've made this, let's make a little project out of it, should we?
Yes, let's do it.
That little needle nook in there.
I'll pull it this.
Here's, oh, and we've pressed toward the darker fabric so we can tuck our seam allowances underneath, and then they don't show. And that's not always possible, but if we press to the dark on these and press to the dark on this one, we can make a nice little 9 patch and make a project.
Okay.
So we've sewn our 1.5 inch strips, and now we'll just cut 2 1.5 inch strips. And where do you put the ruler when you're making your cuts?
I usually do it on the ruler when I'm doing this small project.
I think that's easy. And then that line can go right on the last thread on the edge once you've straightened your edge. So we'll just need 2 of those,
Okay. So
and we'll
this
alternate them
one.
to make our little 9 patch. Okay. And it's worth the time to be careful. Measure twice, cut once, or you end up making it twice. So here are the pieces we need for our 9 patch. And let's take a minute and talk about alternating our seams. So since we've pressed to the dark on both of these, then we can nestle our seam allowances, or we tell the kids, kiss your seam allowances, and then they'll produce a nice point where they meet.
So, you
So
want
let's
many
grab
gaps.
some pins,
Okay, we'll get our little pins out.
and let me just demonstrate my favorite pinning way too when we nestle these seams. And I usually go in one seam allowance since they're nestled, and come out with the other end of the pin in the other seam allowance, and that way that keeps it secure, and those seam allowances nestle and match. There you go.
And do you always pin?
On intersections, I always pin.
Always.
You just can never trust that they're going to stay.
Stay right there.
But if it's just 2 pieces of fabric, no, I let the machine do the work for me.
Okay.
So we'll sew that, and then
Let's
we'll
go
sew
sew.
this to the other side.
All right.
Mhm.
All right. So we've got our 9 patch finished.
All right, and we're almost ready to press, but I want to show you one little trick. That Darlene Zimmerman calls this her magic twist. And she's quite a renowned quilter.
I
and
want to see this magic twist.
you grab the seam allowance that you've just sewn, and then tug slightly, and it releases those stitches just in the intersection. It's not going to take your block apart, but it also allows so that seam can fan,
Oh, that's
And
great.
reduce the bulk in that seam allowance.
And then you press it like that. So let me,
Right. Mhm.
So I take them like this, and then I
And then
just
just
twist.
twist toward you
Oh,
or
isn't
away
that
from you.
brilliant?
Right. And then
I've
another
done
thing
it.
about pressing. Oh, yeah, let's do all 4 sides.
So that's,
Mhm. And this only works if your seams have nestled and they alternate, and
good to
then
go.
they, look how cute this is. It makes a little teeny 4 patch. Then you know you've sewn it right. You've done
You'll
it
never
right.
see it on the reverse, but yes, while
Right,
you're
but-
ironing, you can enjoy that
And
four
it's
patch.
flat. And another tip about pressing is that in quilting, we usually press from the top of the block to get a
Mhm.
more crisp and even. And this is the exception to the rule. We're going to press this little 4 patch with the nose of the iron to make that flat. And just, you know, speaking from quilting, this is one way to avoid bulk in your seams. And then you turn it over and finish pressing those seams the direction that they want to go. So we can't always be underneath the dark, but our goal here is to make that block lie flat. So go
Mhm.
ahead and finish pressing that.
And sometimes pressing's the best part. You can see
Yeah.
how
See
beautiful
your
your
work you've done.
block's coming through.
Okay, so now
Okay.
you've got a darling little 9 patch.
Okay.
And we can finish up and make a little
All
needle
right,
nook.
show us how
Okay.
it's done.
So we have this is a 3.5 inch 9 patch, and we use another 3.5 inch block, and
Okay.
that's the outside of
That's
the
outside.
needle nook. Then we'll use
That's this side.
Mhm. Then we'll use
And you need
a
a long piece.
long piece for the cover, and that's 6.5 by 3.5. And then we're going to use this piece for a little pocket, and it's 3.5 by 5. Okay, so we'll sew these right sides together. And another thing that I always do is I always fold it over the way right over left, and then take it to the sewing machine. I usually put a pin here so I know that's the upper right hand corner, that's the corner that I start sewing at, and I usually pin before I go to the sewing machine.
So you're pinning the right side.
Right.
Okay.
So right sides together, make that seam, and then we'll put the rest of it together.
All right. Okay.
Okay, now we're ready to press that seam.
So your tip is to press flat first.
Sink the stitches. Uh-huh.
And then we're going to open it up, get a nice good press
Mhm.
right along there.
Okay,
Great.
good. Then we're going to put a pocket on it. So we folded this little 3.5 by 5.5, and we're going to lay that on the
Is
front.
that going to flip? Okay.
It will, but I'll show you a little trick.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to sandwich this in between the backing.
You get to save a step, it looks like,
Right.
by doing it this way.
And then we'll pin all the way around these 3 sides and leave the last side undone for now. Okay?
So let's pin
All right.
these sides. And we leave an opening.
We're just going to leave this whole end
whole
completely
side.
open. The
Okay.
bottom of the pocket, we'll leave that side open.
All right, let's go sew.
Okay? Okay, and now we need to turn these corners so that they're nice and square. And if you don't mind, I'm going to show you a little
Yeah.
tip that I like. And I use this when I'm turning a quilt or a pocket. I put my finger all the way in the end of that corner.
Do you clip your corners?
No, I'm not
No.
going to clip it. And fold right along the stitching, and then hold it with my thumb and pop that out. And it gives a really nice
That is a great
square
tip.
corner. You can do this on a pillowcase, you know, when you're folding a pillowcase. And hold it right there. So I'll
And
let
then
you.
pop it in.
Mhm. So put your finger all the way up there, nice and snug.
So
Fold it
like
exactly on the
that.
stitches.
Like
Hold that with your
that.
thumb, and then you kind of force it with your thumb out. Just like that.
What a great
Perfect.
tip. I
Great.
love that tip.
So we'll turn this inside out, we'll press it, then we sew the last seam, and then we'll flip the pocket around
Okay.
and be done.
So we're going to give that a nice press. these sides is always the trickiest for me.
Yeah. Job. Cool. Okay, perfect. And now I want you to just stitch across that end, and then we'll flip this pocket back to the front, and the seam's completely done, and we'll add this little piece of wool so you can put your needles and pins in it, and it's done.
Okay, that's perfect.
Now what you want to do is flip that pocket around to the other side, and you can fold
Do
those
that
little
same
corners,
thing?
just fold it straight down.
Let's just do that like you
Hold
showed
it.
me.
And it should just pop right out. If not, then we'll use a
It
chopstick
should.
and get those corners out. Those are a little more bulky than the other corners were.
They have a few more layers, don't they?
And you can finish those edges with a zigzag if you feel like it.
Oh my
But
goodness.
this is
Isn't
nearly
that
done.
Clever?
Right. So now we'll fold it in half and then see where the middle of it is, and then stitch this little piece of wool here right down the middle. Maybe we'll trim this off
Right
a little
there.
bit. Yeah. So go ahead and press that, get those corners.
Okay, I'll trade you spots
Okay.
while you trim.
Yeah. And that way you've always got, you know, a place for your little needles and your pins.
This is
you
a
can put
great
thread in there.
project you could do with your 4-H girls. I bet
Right.
you've done a few of these, and
Yeah.
for your daughters,
Or make it for a gift for a friend.
yes, absolutely, because you always need someplace to put your needles.
Okay, so we'll fold this in half. And actually, if you wanted to, you can top stitch or edge stitch around this.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll fold it to get a crease line. Well, that didn't work. Let's fold that. Finger press it. Then we can see where the line is.
And then we just match it up to this.
And then we'll just lay this flat out. Yeah, that center. And turn it over and stitch in the ditch right here.
Oh, great idea.
Okay.
Okay, let's go.
You can pin it if you want to.
So this looks like it's all done.
Right. Now all we need to do is add the pins, the needles. You've got a nice little pocket here. You can put thread or your
A small pair of scissors. like
little
you have.
scissors, or embroidery floss, or a yo-yo maker, and you've got a little sewing kit to go.
That's perfect. And now it fits into my bigger bag
Right,
with
in your
all my
color scheme.
supplies.
Yeah.
And so, great idea. Another great project, simple and easy.
Right.
And it's just going to make you more organized to be a better quilter. Thanks, Deonn.
You're welcome. Thank you.